Thank you and welcome, Dr. Smiley. Congratulations on this new book. And how coincidental is it that we're having this conversation today when the Department of Justice, Kristen Clark, head of the Civil Rights Division, makes this major announcement about Phoenix. And we're talking about these pattern and practice investigations that the Biden administration, the Obama administration, made the hallmark of their administration, and which were eliminated under Donald Trump's one term and likely to be eliminated if he is again elected. So we're going to talk about all of that. But before we get into that, let's start with your book. Well, first question I always like to ask my authors are, what was the catalyst for you writing this book? I know you've written other books, but why this book in this moment?
Well, first, thank you, Areva, for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on the show. So the short or condensed version of how this book came about was that a colleague and I had written an article as kind of a response paper about mass incarceration, and some folks had put out some myths out there. And so Haymarket Books, who published the book, had come to us about writing a book. That didn't pan out, but I had this idea that I thought was only going to be an article about defund and kind of the thesis of the book. And when I had this opportunity to work with Haymarket Books, that has put out so many amazing progressive and radical books on topics of abolition and how to rethink our society, I really wanted to take that opportunity, and I pitched them a proposal saying, I have this idea around defund that I'd like to explore. Would you be interested? And I have this kind of more non-traditional idea of doing these interviews and having the book be written in kind of conversation form as opposed to just kind of a long form essay. And they took the chance on me, and however long later, the book is out.
Okay, let's talk about defund. As I was introducing this segment, I talked about that word, the slogan, defund the police. Your book isn't called Defund the Police, but it's about the police and our police system. Many folks, including our very esteemed veteran Congressman James Clyburn from South Carolina, was very critical of the term defund the police. And it became a term almost like critical race theory. It was like a bad word in certain circles to say it. It got misused in a lot of cases, but talk about just that term and what's your visceral response? And do you think that term did harm or good to the underlying issues that it was trying to address?
So first, I would say that I think it did a lot of good. I think that the fact that we had President Biden at the 2022 State of the Union, part of his speech was saying that it shouldn't be defund the police, it should be fund the police, showed how scared politicians were of how that term was being used as a way of organizing and a way of capturing a particular moment within a longer legacy of movements towards racial equality, class struggles, and alike. And so I think where Democrats went wrong is where they've kind of gone wrong in a lot of these things that you mentioned. They, instead of taking ownership or being proud in that, a segment of the left, even if it's more progressive or radical than them, are trying to move the direction of our country towards these equalities and take ownership and get on board, they've shied away from it. And by shying away from terms like defund, critical race theory, wokeism, it allows for the Republicans and more conservatives to misinterpret and misappropriate the term. Because what we've seen was when Congresswoman Cori Bush said that she supported defund, we saw the Democrats turn on her. But while Republicans use defund and these other terms as kind of a boogeyman in many regards, they also reappropriated them as well. So we heard Marjorie Taylor Greene talk about defund the FBI when Mar-a-Lago was raided. We've heard Donald Trump saying defund the DOJ when he was being investigated. So Republicans very much understood the power of this term and how it could capture a larger movement. And so I think Democrats really need to look at what defund is calling for and peel back the layer that it's not simply about anarchy, but it's about, in one regard, a pragmatic policy solution. And on the other end, it's about re-envisioning what public safety and promoting care looks like for our society, particularly those who are the most vulnerable in our society.
So I watched the term evolve. During the COVID, I started an online show called The Special Report, and I was on the air pretty much every day. And then it was 3 days a week, but I was on the air a lot, and I was interviewing lots of organizers, lots of folks who were on the ground in cities around this country, leading Black Lives Matters marches, just leading marches. And a lot of the people, Dr. Smiley, who supported the defund movement literally wanted the police to be defunded. So I guess for me, I kind of watched this evolution from those that wanted to abolish complete police departments, folks who would come on and say, we should have neighborhoods police each other. So if somebody breaks into my car, I'm not going to call the police. I'm going to knock on my neighbor's door. We're going to have neighborhood watch groups involved in police, watching, I won't use the word policing, but watching our neighbors to make sure nobody's breaking in your house or committing any kind of crime in your neighborhood, where they literally meant, no, nobody, like, go into cities and basically fire everyone that has the title police. And now us, community folks, do this work. And then I watched it evolve to, no. We don't mean fire the police department or eliminate police departments. We mean reallocate budgets. We mean, take the mental health piece away from them. We mean take responding to non-violent, crimes away from them. Take the routine car stops. So is it fair to say that the movement was always about reimagining versus just being honest? And I'm suggesting you're being honest, but just acknowledging, I should say, that there were people who literally believed then and still believe today that police should be eliminated from our system altogether.
Yeah, so to answer that, I think one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book was because I saw defund in summer 2020 as a major shift from previous Black Lives Matter movements, right? If we go back to the death of Trayvon Martin, to Michael Brown and Eric Garner, in the 2010s under the Obama administration, we heard a lot of people talking about various reforms, right? More diversity in hiring, more police bias training, de-escalation tactics, body-worn cameras. But what we've seen since that time, and the Washington Post being one of the leaders in tracking police-involved shootings and police-involved deaths, is that even with all of these reforms, cops continue to kill people. In fact, the number of people that cops have killed has gone up. And so 2020 became this kind of moment where people were saying, we've done all of these things, we've implemented all these policies, and things are not changing. And it allowed for a moment for a more radical voice to step in and kind of fill that void. Because let's put it out there, abolition of police, abolition of prisons has been a movement for at least the last 50 years. But we certainly saw it become more centered after 2020. And to your point about, the evolution of it, I would say that it's of the term is that it's run on parallel planes, right? That we've heard both voices kind of continuously, and it just depends on who you talk to in that moment, right? Some people are certainly reformists who've gotten behind aspects of defund to reallocate money. There are other folks who are abolitionists who are saying, no, this is the first step into eradicating the police. And while people might critique and say, well, that's just messy, or they don't know what they're doing, that's all social movements. No social movement is a clean through line. When the term abolition came up during slavery, there were certainly debates on what that meant. Did that mean sending Africans back to Africa? Did that mean integration? Did that mean putting them in some plot of land by themselves? When we look at the civil rights movement, I think of the Birmingham campaign, the Children's Campaign, and Fred Shuttlesworth demanding that there be Black clerks and Black shopkeepers in these stores. And, Others saying, well, maybe it just means desegregation. So, there's constantly debate. And I think that's what the beauty around social movements is, that it allows us the space to have the opportunity to have those conversations openly, honestly, debate, argue, because it's how the needle moves forward. And if we just say, well, it didn't work, or, oh, it's all over the place, then we're defeating ourselves, because there's no social movement that starts with a majority of people behind it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a social movement. It's certainly that would be just the mainstream. And so most social movements start with a minority voice, and it grows and picks up steam, and it has ebbs and flows of how visible it might be at one point versus maybe people just doing the work behind the scenes. And so we have to allow that time for defund to continue to germinate and see where the movement takes us.
Well, that leads me to my next question. Where is the movement today? Because, you just raised a good point that oftentimes people are working behind the scenes. You don't see them. You don't hear about the movement, but it appeared that the movement died. Or like when I talk about the evolution, I felt like from the people I was interviewing, and clearly, I interview everybody in the world that was involved in this movement, but it felt like to me that the defund, what I'll call the abolitionists who really, really want the police system of policing defunded, eradicated, that their voices were overpowered by the redefinition of defund from, oh, no, we didn't mean really defund. We meant, take 10% of the budget and reallocate it, because that started to sound like folks making it more palatable, trying to make it more acceptable. And it felt like to me, or feels like to me, that the whole defund movement, was really pushed, into the darkness, marginalized and minimized, and that more people became of the let's reimagine. And I don't know, from your interviews and the work that you did for this book, do you feel like, or does your research bear out that the defund movement today is as strong as it was in the summer of 2020?
Well, I think certainly the defund movement, if we want to call it like broadly, I think it's certainly still going on, and we see it playing out in many different ways. And I'll explain that in a second. But, just to think kind of about social movements and social movement theory, we often look back at social movements in kind of like a snapshot way. So again, just to use the civil rights movement as an example, 1954 was Brown v. Board of Education. The Voting Rights Act didn't come till 1965. That's an 11-year gap where people were organizing, boycotts, marches, sit-ins. And we have to remember, Dr. King, across that 11 years, wasn't at a boycott or a march or a rally every single day of his life. It had, its own ebbs and flows. And so what we see right now is a lot of movement organizers organizing against things like cop cities that are happening across the country. We see, especially at the local level, people who are running for elected positions with a much more progressive position, particularly around defund, or wanting to move monies away from police. So we see things like mutual aid, where people are sharing resources, sharing knowledge. I think why we also have seen this kind of defund fall from the spotlight has a lot to do with mainstream media. And not to just blame mainstream media, but mainstream media also follows, if it bleeds, it leads. And right now, thankfully, we don't have a hashtag name. So, but that could happen again, and we might see it kind of bubble back up in that kind of way.
Yeah. I'm talking with Dr. Calvin John Smiley. He has a new book out called Defund, Conversations Toward Abolition. When we come forward, I want to talk about how you're thinking about defund, because you're thinking about it in this really broad umbrella term. And I'm not so sure that's the way I understand it and a lot of people. So I want to really go a little deeper on how you are defining the whole movement of defund.